If you've ever believed that music can reach places the mind can't, that a single melody, played at the right moment, can speak louder than years of silence, then please, like this video and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Stay with us till the end, because today, in the middle of a busy street, a worn violin and a quiet woman will do what medicine, therapy, and time could not. Awaken a little boy who hadn't spoken in 6 long years. It was an unusually crisp morning in Boston, one of those spring days that felt like the city was just beginning to stretch after a long gray winter. The sky above Boston Common was pale blue, cut through by streaks of sunlight that filtered between budding branches. The streets buzzed with the hum of passing cars, the occasional bark of a dog, and the murmur of conversations drifting out from sidewalk cafes. But none of these sounds registered with the boy walking next to Jonathan Reed. Evan, just 9 years old, walked with a slow, deliberate step, his eyes locked on the pavement, his hands buried in the pockets of his navy windbreaker. His blonde hair was tousled despite his father's attempt to comb it before they left home, and his oversized noise-canceling headphones, light gray with scuff marks along the sides, hugged his head like a barrier to the outside world. He didn't speak. He hadn't spoken in 6 years. Jonathan, a man known once for commanding boardrooms and negotiating billion-dollar mergers, now measured his mornings by how smoothly he could get his son into the car, and whether Evan would tolerate the drive without retreating into himself completely. Widowed at 56, he had since withdrawn from the public eye. His tailored suits were now exchanged for simple, dark wool coats. His private office downtown sat mostly untouched these days. His new full-time role was this: father, caretaker, and silent witness to a child locked in a world of his own. Today's destination was one they visited twice a week, a small therapy clinic near Beacon Hill, where a kind but weary speech pathologist tried to coax sound from Evan's lips. It had become routine, almost mechanical, until today. As they crossed Tremont Street and entered the edge of the Boston Common, something shifted. Evan slowed, then stopped. Jonathan didn't notice at first. He was adjusting the strap on the canvas messenger bag slung across his shoulder when he realized he was suddenly walking alone. He turned back. Evan stood a few steps behind, motionless. "Evan?" Jonathan asked softly, not expecting a reply. The boy didn't look at him. Instead, his head was tilted ever so slightly, not toward his father, but toward the open plaza beyond the trees, where sunlight spilled across the cobblestones like a stage light on some forgotten corner of the city. Jonathan followed his son's gaze, but saw nothing unusual at first, just pedestrians moving along, a few kids playing, a woman walking her dog. Then he heard it. Faint, almost drowned out by the background noise of the city, but unmistakable, the soft, melancholic strains of a violin. It was coming from near the rotunda by the fountain. A street performer, most likely. Boston was full of them, especially as the weather warmed. But this time, the sound carried something else. There was a gentleness to the notes, a raw honesty that seemed to hover in the air longer than it should have. It wasn't flashy or technical. It was tender. Jonathan turned back to Evan. His son was still frozen in place, but his body language had changed. Evan's shoulders, often hunched and tight, seemed to lower just slightly. His fingers twitched at his sides. And although the boy's gaze remained unfocused, there was a subtle tilt to his posture, as if something unseen had taken hold of his attention. Jonathan didn't speak. He didn't move. He was afraid that whatever was happening might vanish the second he acknowledged it. He watched as Evan took a single step forward. Then another. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't anxiety or sensory overload. It was something else entirely. Curiosity? Recognition? Evan continued walking slowly toward the sound, away from the path they always took. Jonathan followed, unsure of what he would find at the source, but certain of one thing: something important had just begun. She played with her eyes closed. Isabel Moreau sat on a low folding stool near the stone fountain at the edge of Boston Common, her fingers moving lightly along the neck of a worn honey-colored violin. A soft scarf was tied around her neck, fluttering slightly with each breeze that passed. Her coat was old, sleeves frayed, but clean and wrapped tight around her small frame. The toes of her boots tapped faintly on the sidewalk, not in rhythm, but to chase away the chill that still lingered in early spring. The bow danced gently across the strings. She wasn't playing for anyone in particular, not anymore. She hadn't made more than $20 that morning, and most of it came from a kind tourist who'd mistaken her for a conservatory student. Claire de Lune. Her fingers moved as if in prayer. It was the one piece she never removed from her set list, no matter how many passerby ignored it. The violin wasn't a great one, just a salvaged instrument she'd had since before the accident, but in the right light, with the right kind of silence around her, it still held something fragile and beautiful. And this morning, she needed that. Isabel had once taught music at a private art school in upstate New York. Before the fall. Before the surgeries that made standing for long periods unbearable. Before the administrators decided it was in the students' best interest to replace her. Her world had narrowed since then, first to a small apartment, then to street corners, and eventually, to a place where music wasn't a profession anymore, just a way to stay sane. Still, she played. And this morning, she chose not to open her violin case for tips. She had drawn a simple white chalk circle on the pavement in front of her instead, a quiet invitation, "You are welcome to stop here. No coins required. Just listen." And someone did. She didn't hear him at first, not above the hum of the city, not over the quiet swirl of Debussy echoing in her ears. But then, a subtle shift in energy. A presence. Like a bird sensing someone entering its field of vision. Isabel opened her eyes. There, just inches from the edge of the chalk ring, sat a young boy, no older than 9. His legs were crossed, his hands tucked beneath his thighs. Blonde hair, headphones clamped over his ears. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. He simply stared, not at her, but at the violin. Isabel's fingers faltered slightly, surprised. She studied him, cautiously adjusting her bow pressure to soften the tone. It was a street corner, after all. Children passed by all the time. Some stopped, danced, clapped. But not like this. There was something still in him. Not bored stillness, but focused, absorbing stillness. As if the music was not something he was listening to with his ears, but something he was receiving with his whole body. Isabel's heart stuttered. She looked up briefly, past the boy, and saw a man standing 20 feet behind him. Gray hair, expensive coat, stunned expression. The man didn't move either, just stared at the boy, as if seeing him for the first time. Isabel turned back. She didn't speak. Instead, her fingers shifted seamlessly into a slower, softer melody. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, played with a delicacy and reverence it seldom received. A lullaby, yes, but played like a hymn. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't take off his headphones. But as the final note hovered, he leaned ever so slightly forward, like a flower turning toward the sun. Then, without a word, without asking, he crossed the invisible boundary of the chalk ring, and sat down inside it. Right there. Quiet. Peaceful. As if he belonged. Isabel blinked hard, suddenly aware of how tight her chest felt. No one else noticed. People passed. A jogger, a man on his phone, a pair of teenagers arguing about coffee. But within that small circle, between one broken violin and one silent boy, something sacred had just begun. She didn't know his name. She didn't know that he hadn't spoken since he was 3. She didn't know his father was standing behind him, holding his breath. All she knew was, someone had listened. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Jonathan Reed's heart skipped. At first, all he saw was Evan moving away, breaking the routine, veering off the carefully mapped course between the parking lot and the clinic. His initial reaction was one of panic. He stepped forward, instinctively reaching out, prepared to call his son back, to stop him before the situation spiraled into one of Evan's rare but terrifying meltdowns. "Evan," he said, low and firm, like the way the therapists had taught him, "don't startle, don't raise your voice, keep your tone neutral." But Evan didn't flinch. He didn't freeze. He didn't show any of the typical signs of sensory overload. Instead, he walked, slowly, carefully, toward the woman with the violin. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Evan was moving toward the music. He hesitated, unsure if he should intervene. His fingers hovered at his side, fists half-formed. 6 years of strict routines, calming protocols, learned warnings. Don't allow new stimuli without preparation. Don't allow closeness to strangers. Don't allow sudden change. And yet here it was, happening right in front of him, and every fiber of his being screamed to act. But something held him back. Evan had stopped just short of a white chalk circle drawn on the pavement. The music floated in the air, soft and deliberate. The violinist had her eyes closed, completely unaware of her audience. She swayed gently with the notes, lost in them, as if playing only for herself. Jonathan's son didn't move again. He stood still, perfectly still, staring not at the woman, but at the instrument in her hands. Then, he sat down. Right there on the cold sidewalk, within that chalk ring, cross-legged, calm, still. Jonathan froze. He had never seen his son do that before, not in a public space, not spontaneously. Sitting was always directed, assisted, explained. But now Evan had done it entirely on his own, without prompting, without distress. Like it was natural. A wave of emotion hit Jonathan like a tide. Hope, fear, confusion. He blinked rapidly, unsure if what he was seeing was real. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Evan liked the vibration of the strings, the frequency. Maybe this was just a fluke. But then he saw Evan's face. The boy's expression wasn't blank, not flat, not shut off. His eyes were open, wide even. He was watching. Not the woman. Not the crowd. Just the violin. And it wasn't just a stare. It was connected. Intentional. Alive. Jonathan's knees felt weak. He took a step back and leaned against a nearby lamppost, one hand pressing to his chest. The city buzzed around him, footsteps, horns, chatter, but all of it blurred. In the center of his focus was the boy who had barely reacted to a birthday party, who hadn't made eye contact since he was 3, who treated playgrounds like mazes to avoid. Now sitting quietly, transfixed by sound. The violinist opened her eyes. She must have sensed the shift in atmosphere, or perhaps she felt his gaze. Her fingers faltered for a fraction of a second, then steadied again. Her eyes found the boy, and for a moment she just looked at him, as if uncertain whether he was really there. Then she did something Jonathan would never forget. She changed the song. The fluid notes of Clair de Lune faded seamlessly into a new melody. Simpler. Softer. Familiar. The opening bars of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star emerged, not childish but warm, played with the tenderness of a mother humming at midnight. Evan didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. But slowly, as the lullaby unfolded, he tilted his head. Just slightly. Just enough. And Jonathan saw it. His son was listening. Really listening. It wasn't the mechanical response of someone reacting to noise. It wasn't a startle. It wasn't agitation or overload. It was presence. Focus. Awareness. And then, just for a moment, Evan's fingers moved. A light twitch against his knee, as if something inside him wanted to reach forward. Jonathan's mouth parted, but no words came. His throat was tight, his eyes burning. He had come to accept that silence was part of their life now. That therapy was about maintenance, not miracles. That progress would come in inches, over years. But now, in this forgotten corner of the city, a stranger with a violin had somehow reached his son in a way no doctor, no program, no expert ever had. He didn't understand it. He didn't know what it meant. But he knew, deep in his bones, that something had shifted. The music faded into a hush. The last note of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star hung in the air like mist, lingering for a breath before it dissolved into the sounds of the city, passing cars, distant voices, and the whisper of early spring wind rustling the trees overhead. Evan didn't move. He remained seated inside the chalk ring, cross-legged and still, his gaze locked not on the performer, but on the space in front of her, where the sound had once been. It was as though he were waiting for something, or perhaps absorbing something that only he could feel. Jonathan stood frozen a short distance away, not daring to call out or even shift his weight. He had no words for what he was witnessing. Just a fragile, trembling instinct. Let it be. Minute after minute passed. People moved around them. A man jogged by. A woman paused with her dog, smiled briefly at the violinist, then continued on. A group of college students laughed as they walked past. But inside that small circle, the world had slowed to a hush. And Evan stayed. 1 minute. 2. 3. Isabel, still seated, lowered her bow slightly, resting it on her knee. Her breath was shallow. She didn't dare speak, though she desperately wanted to. She had seen a lot in her years performing on the street. Kids dancing, some crying, the occasional toddler trying to pluck her strings. But this was different. She didn't know the boy. She didn't know that for 6 long years, he hadn't responded to anything. Not birthday songs, not lullabies, not the whirring noise machines in therapy rooms. She only knew that, right now, he was present. Deeply. Entirely. And then it happened. Evan raised his hands, slowly, tentatively, like he wasn't sure what they were supposed to do. And then, he clapped. Once. Then again. Then once more. 3 small claps. Gentle. Awkward. Unrhythmic. But unmistakable. Jonathan gasped so sharply that it startled a pigeon nearby. His son, who had not shown direct reaction to music in over half a decade, had just offered a response. Not out of routine. Not because someone asked. But because something inside him chose to. Tears blurred Jonathan's vision. He wanted to run forward, to drop to his knees beside Evan, to say something, anything, but he didn't. Not yet. He feared the moment might vanish if he did. Isabel blinked, confused at first. She offered a soft smile toward the boy, but he didn't return it. His face remained neutral, almost expressionless. But the clapping, however small, spoke louder than any words could. She dipped her head slightly. A quiet bow of gratitude. Nothing dramatic. Just one artist acknowledging the audience who mattered more than all the others. She didn't know the significance of what had just happened. She couldn't have. To her, it might have seemed like a sweet gesture from a quiet child. But to Jonathan Reed, it was a miracle. A break in the silence that had held his family hostage for years. He lifted a hand to his face, brushing the corner of his eye. His breath shook in his chest. It had been so long since he had seen his son respond like this. So long since anything, not a therapist, not a specialist, not a carefully structured exercise, had made it through to him. And here it was. 3 small claps, offered freely to a woman playing music on a sidewalk. Jonathan didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was too tight, his chest too full. The tears that gathered weren't loud or dramatic, just quiet witnesses to something fragile and true. Around them, life continued. Horns honked. A child cried somewhere in the distance. A bus hissed as it came to a stop. But within that chalk circle, within those 5 precious minutes, a boy who had been silent for most of his life had finally made a sound, not with his voice, but with his hands. And that was enough. The next day, the air was warmer, the sun a little brighter over Boston Common. Morning light bounced off the buildings and danced on the stone paths as people passed by with coffee cups, tote bags, and dogs pulling on leashes. But Jonathan Reed saw none of it. His eyes scanned only one place, the same spot near the fountain where, 24 hours earlier, something unexplainable had happened. And she was still there. Isabelle Moreau sat exactly as before, the same weathered violin resting under her chin, her bow sweeping gently across the strings. Today she played something lighter, perhaps a folk tune, maybe something she had written herself. Jonathan couldn't tell. He didn't recognize the melody. But he recognized her. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her eyes were open this time, but distant, focused on the invisible shapes the music was painting in the air around her. A few people milled nearby, pausing to listen or toss loose change into the open violin case. But no child sat in the chalk circle today. No miracle was repeating itself. Still, Jonathan approached. He waited until the song finished and the bow lifted from the strings. Then, before she could begin another, he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said gently. Isabelle looked up, startled at first, then settled when she saw his face. She didn't recognize him fully, not yet, but there was something familiar in his expression. Jonathan reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small cream-colored business card. He held it out with 2 fingers. "Jonathan Reed," he said. "Reed and Bell Foundation." Isabelle hesitated, then took the card. Her fingers were calloused where they pinched the bow, but soft in the way that revealed a teacher's history. She looked at the card, then back at him. "I saw you yesterday," he continued. "My son, the boy who sat in your circle." Now she remembered. Her eyes widened. Her body straightened ever so slightly on the stool. Jonathan smiled, small, tired, but sincere. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "What you did, what happened, was more than music. You reached my son in a way no one has. Not therapists, not doctors, not even me." Isabelle opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing rehearsed to say to that. She nodded slowly, visibly moved but unsure what to do with the weight of his words. "I'm not here just to thank you," Jonathan added. "I'm here to ask something." She blinked. "Ask." He nodded. "My foundation works with programs that serve children with autism. Most of it is educational funding, technology, access to therapy. But after yesterday," he paused, "I realized something's missing. We don't fund anything for the soul." Isabelle tilted her head, unsure where this was going. "I want you to consider working with us," Jonathan said. "We're starting a new initiative, one I haven't even fully written yet. I'd like you to be part of it." She furrowed her brow, her fingers still curled around the card. I'm not a performer, not really," she said, almost apologetically. "I mean, I used to teach. But now this is just how I survive. I play on sidewalks. I don't even know who's listening half the time." Jonathan shook his head gently. "You knew yesterday." Silence passed between them. Isabelle looked down at the card again, then at her violin case, lined with a few scattered dollar bills and coins. Then she looked back up. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because," Jonathan said, "when no one else could reach my son, you did. With nothing but a melody." Isabelle didn't reply right away. The wind rustled softly between them. She looked over his shoulder, into the open stretch of Boston Common, as if searching for something invisible. Then she whispered, "Okay." Jonathan extended his hand. Isabelle stood slowly, a slight wince passing through her legs, and shook it. It was brief. Wordless. But something had shifted again. The invitation came just 3 days later. Isabelle hadn't expected to hear from him again, not really. She tucked Jonathan Reed's business card into the side pocket of her violin case, unsure whether to keep it or forget it. The moment had been surreal. Beautiful, yes. But brief. And people like him, men in long coats with foundations named after them, didn't usually follow up on sidewalk promises. But then her phone buzzed. A voicemail. Polite, calm, unmistakably him. "Miss Moreau, this is Jonathan Reed. I hope you're well. I'd like to speak to you more formally about the project we discussed. If you're open to it, my team and I are putting together an initiative called Silent Strings. I'd love to tell you more. Now she stood in the glass-walled conference room of a downtown Boston nonprofit office, violin case in hand, feeling completely out of place. The carpet was too soft, the coffee too expensive, and the air smelled like cologne and printer ink. Jonathan entered quietly, dressed in a charcoal blazer, no tie, his gray hair combed neatly. He smiled when he saw her. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "I almost didn't," Isabel admitted, offering a half-smile. "This is a long way from the sidewalk." He gestured for her to sit. "I hope it won't be the last time." They talked. He explained his vision. Silent Strings would be a mobile program, musicians traveling to autism centers across New England, bringing live music to children who often couldn't access concerts, lessons, or even simple exposure to sound in a safe, welcoming way. The goal wasn't therapy. It wasn't a performance. It was presence. Connection. Something in between. "I don't want a flashy performer," Jonathan said. "I don't want someone trained to entertain. I want someone who listens before they play." Isabel listened quietly, her fingers tracing the zipper on her violin case. "And you want me to lead it?" she asked finally, her voice careful. Jonathan nodded. "Not as an employee. As a partner. I want you to shape this." She laughed, almost involuntarily. "I'm just a street player. I don't even finish some songs. Sometimes I forget what key I started in." Jonathan's response came instantly, quiet but firm. "That's okay. My son didn't finish any sentence for years, until the day he hummed your melody." The room went still. Isabel looked away, blinking. She had no words for that. None that could carry the weight of what he'd just said. "I'm not used to being asked," she said after a moment. "Not since I left teaching. People see me and assume I'm just another person who couldn't make it." Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "That's not what I see." "What do you see?" she asked, still not looking at him. He paused, then said, "I see someone who didn't give up making music, even when no one was clapping." Silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Then Isabel exhaled. "You'll have to be patient with me," she said. "I've learned how," he replied gently. A smile crept across her lips. And just like that, something shifted. The sidewalk where she used to play began to feel smaller. Not less important, but no longer the only place her music belonged. She stood and extended her hand, unsure if it was the right gesture in this kind of setting. Jonathan stood too, meeting her halfway. Their handshake was brief but solid, an agreement built not on contracts, but shared understanding. She picked up her violin case. "Where do we start?" she asked. "Wherever the music needs to go," he said. And for the first time in a long while, Isabel Moreau felt seen, not as a player, not as a castaway teacher, but as someone who could lead. The theater wasn't large, just a renovated community space in Cambridge with wood-paneled walls and rows of mismatched seats, but to Isabel, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. It had been 3 months since the morning she met a silent boy on a Boston sidewalk. 3 months since Jonathan Reed handed her a business card and along with it, a kind of hope she hadn't dared to imagine. And now here they were, the first performance of Silent Strings. The program had come together faster than anyone expected. Maybe it was the urgency Jonathan brought to it, or the quiet conviction Isabel carried. Maybe it was the way donors responded to a story that didn't need embellishment. But mostly, Isabel thought, it was because people were hungry for something real. Tonight, the audience was filled with families from across New England, children on the spectrum, their parents, teachers, aides. No one expected perfection. No one demanded it. This wasn't about flawless performance. It was about connection. And in the front row, sitting very still with his hands in his lap, was Evan. He wore a soft gray sweater and khaki pants. His blonde hair was a little longer now, brushed carefully to the side. The headphones were gone, just for tonight. Jonathan sat beside him, hands clasped, watching him more than the stage. Isabel stood backstage, her heart thudding in her chest. She wore a navy dress, not fancy, but enough to make her feel like this was a moment. Her violin, freshly restrung, waited in her hands like an old friend. Someone gave her a nod. It was time. She stepped out into the glow of the stage lights. A soft wave of applause greeted her, not roaring but warm welcoming. She walked to the center of the stage, adjusted the mic stand slightly though she had no intention of speaking, and lifted her instrument. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't look for approval. She looked at Evan. Their eyes didn't meet, but she didn't need them to. He was looking at her violin, just as he had the first time. She raised her bow. The first note of Clair de Lune filled the room. It was slower than usual. Softer. Every phrase unfolded like breath. The hall fell utterly silent. Even the rustle of programs and shifting chairs ceased. The music seemed to pour not just from the instrument, but from somewhere deeper inside her, a place only that boy had opened. Jonathan watched from his seat, holding back tears before the first stanza ended. He wasn't a man easily moved, not after the life he'd lived. But tonight wasn't about control. It was about surrender. And Evan. He didn't fidget. He didn't rock back and forth or shield his ears. He sat still. Entirely still. As the final note hovered in the air, Isabel let the silence carry it. 1 second. 2. 3. Then Evan stood up. The audience gasped softly, a ripple of surprise moving through the room. Jonathan turned to his son, his hand half raised, unsure what Evan was doing. Then came the sound. Clap. 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 3 deliberate claps. Slow. Clear. Measured. From a boy who hadn't spoken in years. From a boy who barely reacted to anything that wasn't familiar or controlled. Now applauding. Isabel lowered her violin slowly, unable to mask the tremble in her chin. The room burst into tears before it burst into applause. Parents wept. A teacher buried her face in her hands. Even the ushers at the back exchanged looks of disbelief. Some stood. Others stayed seated, hands pressed to their hearts. No one clapped louder than Evan, but none clapped with more awe. Jonathan turned away for a moment, pretending to adjust his glasses. But the truth was obvious. He was crying. Quietly. Deeply. Letting years of fear and frustration dissolve in 3 simple sounds. On stage, Isabel offered a small nod, not theatrical, not grand. Just enough for one boy to know, this was for you. And in the first row, Evan sat back down, his face calm. Not smiling, but peaceful. That was enough. In a world that often demands words to validate worth, we sometimes forget how much can be said in silence. We praise eloquence, celebrate speeches, measure intelligence by articulation. But not everyone speaks with their voice. Some people speak with their eyes. Some speak with their hands. And a rare few, like Isabel Moreau, speak through music, soft, unpolished, and deeply human. Evan never needed words to feel what he felt. No one had told him to clap. No one had coached him to sit inside that chalk circle. Those moments were born not from instruction, but from instinct. A quiet resonance between a boy who couldn't speak and a woman who had almost forgotten how to be heard. That's the power of presence. Sometimes the most profound connections come not from carefully structured conversations, but from being willing to sit quietly beside someone, and wait. Not to fix them. Not to change them. Just to be with them. To say without saying, I see you. I'm here. And sometimes what we think of as just playing music is actually something much more. It's an offering. A bridge. A language for those who've never found the right words. Isabel didn't walk onto that street corner expecting to change a life. She wasn't there to heal anyone, to teach a lesson, or to make a breakthrough. She was simply trying to survive, one song at a time. Her violin wasn't famous. Her performance wasn't flawless. But she brought it anyway. Every day. Without knowing who would listen, or if anyone would. And that's the lesson. Impact doesn't always come from the most prepared or the most celebrated. Sometimes it comes from the ones who keep showing up, quietly, faithfully, even when no one claps. Jonathan Reed had resources. He had experts in clinics and the best technology money could buy. But none of them reached his son the way a single melody did. Not because they weren't trying, but because sometimes, science needs help from soul. In a time when we rush to diagnose, label, explain, Evan reminded everyone in that auditorium, and far beyond it, that healing isn't always linear. That connection can't always be measured in data points or milestones. Sometimes, connection is just presence, vibration, a sound that lands in the right heart, at the right time. A note, a pause, a breath shared. What Isabel gave that day wasn't therapy. It wasn't even a performance. It was attention. It was patience. It was music offered with no strings attached, except the 4 on her violin. She didn't ask Evan to respond. She just gave him something worth responding to. And that's where the miracle happened. Not in some dramatic transformation, but in the quiet clapping of small hands who'd never clapped before. In the stillness of a boy who finally chose to stay. In the tear of a father who realized that hope can come from the most unexpected places. This isn't just a story about autism. It's not even just about music. It's about what happens when we stop trying to force the world to speak our language, and start listening for theirs. It's about letting people be exactly who they are and trusting that, given the right moment, they'll show us more than we ever thought possible. Not everyone needs a microphone to be heard. Not every breakthrough needs a stage. Sometimes all it takes is a sidewalk, a violin, and someone who believes that even in silence, there's a song waiting to be heard. There are moments in life that defy logic, moments when something simple cuts through the noise of the world and reaches straight into the heart. What happened between Isabel and Evan wasn't planned, taught, or even fully understood. It was pure. Honest. Human. No introductions. No expectations. Just one woman, her violin, and a little boy who hadn't spoken in years. And in that silence, something passed between them, something stronger than words, deeper than explanation. A truth, held gently in every note she played, every breath she took. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't magic. But it mattered. Because sometimes, we don't need to fix people. We just need to see them. To show up. To share something real. And in the end, that was enough. She didn't speak to him. She didn't touch him. She just played, and somehow that was enough. If you've ever doubted that music can change anything, remember this. For someone, a single melody at just the right moment might be the first time they've ever truly felt seen. Not by words. Not by instructions. But by something as simple and as powerful as a song. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you that quiet moments can carry the loudest meaning, like this video. Subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more stories that speak without shouting. And tell us in the comments. When was the last time you saw music touch someone's life? Because sometimes, a violin in the right hands doesn't just play notes. It opens hearts.